Okay, what's going on, everyone? True Techno Gamer here, back for another video. It's been a little while, obviously. These are not usual times. There's been a lot of things that has happened recently, particularly regarding Microsoft and Xbox Series X. Um, and yeah, we got to go into it. We got to talk about it. So, first of all, I wanted to do this video before the Microsoft or before the Xbox Game Showcase event that happened last week. But I was under the weather, caught a bug, not that bug, but just a bug, and yeah, wasn't really able to talk too much. So still have a little stuffiness going on. You probably noticed, but it was either way. I'm here, and we're gonna talk about Microsoft's strategy with the next gen Xbox Series X. And it's very different than anything we've seen before from Microsoft or anything we've seen before in the console space. So I'm gonna kind of break it down. If you're someone who is an Xbox fan or someone who's really looking forward to the Series X, that's great. But just want to make sure that you're clear on what Microsoft is really doing and how it's different than what we have seen before in the console space, and especially different than what Sony is trying to do with the PS5. Then for part two, I will give my impressions and my thoughts on the actual Xbox Game Showcase event that happened last week. All right. So for this one, let's talk about high-level Xbox strategy. Okay. Now, in the console space, whenever there's a new console, typically what has happened in the past is that the console basically resets, right? So when we had the original Xbox or the original PlayStation, when the PS2 came out and the Xbox 360 came out, that essentially meant that the PlayStation 1 and the Xbox, original Xbox, were, basically made obsolete, right? And that developers, including Microsoft and Sony themselves, would no longer be making new games for those systems, and that all new content will be made for the new system, right? So the state of the art moves forward, and we'll see more advanced games that are made to take advantage of the newer technology. And developers are never really shackled with the idea that, for example, when the PS2 came out, and Rockstar was working on Grand Theft Auto 3, for example, that they had to make sure that it was compatible with the PlayStation 1, right? Because if that were the case, Grand Theft Auto 3 would have turned out very differently, right? So that's typically what happens. New controller, whole new system, new CPU, new GPU, new feature set, whatever that means, motion controls, whatever, rumble, camera, sharing, Xbox 360 bought Xbox Live with a gamer score and achievements and everything. So new UI, just a whole new interface. It's a whole new platform, right? That's what has been typical in the console space. Microsoft is trying to do away with it. Okay, quotes from Phil Spencer, head of Xbox himself. He said this several times actually. Is that essentially uh, he wants to do away with the concept of console generations, right? And the way to do that is to make a new device in the Series X that is forward and backwards compatible with everything Xbox. Okay, so that there will be no quote unquote new games built for the Series X in terms of exclusive games for the Series X. In other words, every game that's going to be made available for the Series X for the at least the first 2 years, according to Phil Spencer, will in fact be cross generation, meaning it will also be coming to the Xbox One, the current Xbox One. Okay, so there are no exclusive games being built for the Xbox Series X. That is a big deal, and there's huge implications into that, which I will go into in a little bit. But just understand that. Quoting Phil Spencer, we want every Xbox player to play all the new games from Xbox Game Studios. That's why Xbox Game Studios titles we release in the next couple of years, like Halo Infinite, will be available and play great on Xbox Series X and Xbox One. We won't force you to upgrade to Xbox Series X at launch to play Xbox exclusives. Okay. All right. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that again, all that extra horsepower in the Series X, 12 teraflop GPU, right, 8 core Zen 2 processor, the full breadth of the Xbox Velocity architecture, which is the SSD and other components that ultimately makes the game experience so responsive and so fast. All of those things, developers, when they're making games for Series X, they're not going to be able to target those things as a baseline. Every game they make, at least for the foreseeable future, has to be made to run on the original Xbox. Now, the problem with that is, as you can imagine, the original Xbox is a 1.5 teraflop GPU, and we're talking about a 12 teraflop GPU in the Series X. And again, it's not, the teraflops aren't literally comparable. That 12 teraflops in the Series X is actually closer to something like 17 or 18 teraflops equivalent on the Xbox One. So we're talking about a device, a system that is literally like 13 times more powerful in graphics and 4 to 5 times more powerful in the CPU side. Way more power. But we won't be able to see that power fully realized because the software made available for it will have to run within 8 gigabytes, actually 5.5 gigabytes for Xbox One, and that much, much lower spec device for Xbox One. And that's what we're seeing with Halo Infinite. That's what we're seeing with a lot of those Xbox Studio games, like a lot of those early games coming from Obsidian, like Grounded, right? Obviously, the Outer Worlds, we already see that. So the implication there is that again, in effect, the Xbox Series X will be kind of hamstrung, kind of constricted, to say the least, by the Xbox One, and we won't be able to see the full realization of that. Now, in line with that, Phil Spencer also had an interview where he was talking about how cross generation does not hold games back, and he said to look at the PC as an example of this. Okay, quote Phil Spencer: "Frankly, held back is a meme that gets created by people who are too caught up in device competition. I just look at Windows. It's almost certain if the developer is building a Windows version of their game, then the most powerful and highest fidelity version is the PC version." Okay, here I got to go in a little bit, right? You heard the quote. He's basically saying that if you look at the PC space, and there's a reason why we need to look at the PC space, we see that the high-end PC, if you have the hardware on the PC side, yeah, you can crank up all the settings and get games that's going to look way more beautiful than they will on any other platform, any other console specialty, right? That's what he's basically saying. So we haven't seen games be held back on the PC. And I would love to think that the head of Xbox, Phil Spencer, someone who's been in gaming for almost 30 years now, I think, is smarter than that. And he knows better. Of course, he's going to try to sell his platform. Remember, Xbox is, at this point, a service. It's a platform that is device independent. So Xbox is now the name for games on Windows, games on the Xbox console in your living room, and soon games in the cloud played on your mobile devices, in xCloud. That's the model that Microsoft is going to. If you want to be clear about the PC holding back, or the cross generation model holding back games, all you need to do is really think about this. If you're a gamer, go back and imagine if God of War 1 or 2 on the PS2, which was a late generation game, came out right before the PS3 came out, right? Think back to how good that looked at the time. And imagine if the developer had to make that game playable on the PlayStation 1, right? And what that game could have looked like on a PlayStation 1. Right? If that were the case, there is no way that the game would have looked anywhere near as good as it did. It couldn't take advantage of the memory on the PS2, so the levels wouldn't have been as big, right? The number of attacks wouldn't have been as big. The enemy variety wouldn't have been as much. Obviously, the graphics themselves would have been way worse. Way low polygon models. The environments themselves couldn't look nearly as big in scope. I mean, the list goes on and on. All the particle effects, the reflections, the special effects with the weapon. I mean, none of that stuff would have looked like that because if the game had to be built to run on a PS1, the design of the game would have had to change, right? There's no way. Think about what The Last of Us on the PS3, which came out right before the PS4 came out, right? Think about what that game would have looked like if it had to run on a PS2. You know, are you kidding me? I mean, you're talking 16 times less memory, right? You're talking way less graphical capability. That game was optimized for the cell. What that would have looked like. That's holding something back. See, the PC side, you never see that because there's no games that's ever made exclusively for a particular piece of hardware on the PC, right? So we don't have a concept of what that really would look like on the PC. But on the consoles, we do all the time because when we see new generation console games come out and late generation games that have evolved into being something that is just, way bigger and way more technically capable, like these late generation games I'm mentioning now, we see what those look like, right? So if it had to be, constricted to still work on the previous generation, like the PC does, right? Just think about that. Those games wouldn't look the same. So that is the epitome of being held back, right? And the PC, of course, is held back all the time, right? And Phil knows this, and everyone else knows this. So, yeah, let's just be clear about that. At a high level, the best way to think about what Microsoft is ultimately trying to do right now and what the Series X is going to be about is that Microsoft is effectively bringing the PC model, the PC hardware upgrade model, to the console space, which has never been in the console space before. What do I mean by the PC hardware model? Well, think about it. With the PC as a underlying platform is consistent, right? It is consistently Windows-based for the operating system, which is the real key there, and Steam and Epic Game Store and NVIDIA and AMD and their drivers, right? I mean, that's PC gaming. The actual hardware that you have, everyone has different hardware in the PC, right? And the hardware continues to evolve. But think about this. When you get a new PC, right, and you upgrade the hardware, and you go ahead, you could literally take your whole PC from the whole motherboard and replace everything. Get a whole new motherboard, replace the RAM, the amount of RAM, the type of RAM, the speed of RAM, replace your hard drive, get an SSD, an NVMe, whatever you want to do. Get a brand new Core i9, Ryzen 9 CPU. Get a Titan or a 2080 Ti GPU. It doesn't matter. Go to town. Get a new input device. Get a new mouse. Get a new keyboard, etc., etc. Spend $4,000 upgrading your PC if you want to, right? When you do all of that, what happens? Okay, you got all of those new devices, all that new hardware. You turn it on, and what happens? You boot up Windows still. You go to Steam still. You see the same games that you already had before in your library. They're completely compatible. All that new hardware is completely backwards compatible with everything that played on that PC before. And you go in and you fire up, Red Dead Redemption 2, right? Or Call of Duty Warzone. And guess what? Those games are the same. The game code didn't change because you changed your hardware, right? Those games are the same, flaws and all. What you now can do is just accelerate, right, the performance of those games. So they'll run faster frame rates means smoother gameplay, right? You could turn up the resolution, sliders, so you can, it'll look clearer, it'll look sharper. You could turn up some of the settings, but remember the settings have a cap that is predefined by the developer. It's not dependent on your hardware specifically, right? The cap is defined by the developer before you even purchase the game, right? So everyone has the cap, no matter what hardware you have, right? So there is a cap, but you could turn up the sliders if you had the room to do so based on your previous configuration. And yeah, you're going to get a little bit more detail. Things will look clearer and sharper, higher resolution, and faster frame rate, but it's the same game. The gameplay is the same. The flaws are the same. The areas of the game where there was a lot of popping is probably still going to be there. The areas of the game where the art did not look too great, the textures were low res, the models were low polygon, are still the same case. It's the same code, right? That's the PC model. You could do all you want, and I know the PC crowd and the PC elitists love that. The console model, like I said before, was not that. The console model is a complete reset. You get new console hardware. There's a whole new set of gaming software that is developed and designed specifically to take advantage of that new hardware. And that moves the state of the art forward. It's the difference between revolution versus evolution. The PC model has always been evolutionary. Consoles, not like that, right? So when you looking forward to your Xbox Series X, the Xbox Series X is really nothing more than the same thing as if you were just to upgrade your GPU and upgrade your CPU and like upgrade your motherboard on your PC. You do that, like I said, and then you pop in, you turn on the Series X. What do you see? You see the same Windows kind of Xbox GUI, and you're gonna see the same game that you already had in your digital library before on Xbox One and 360 potentially and whatever, and you're going to be able to play those games. And when you do, they're going to look better. They're going to look sharper. They're going to run faster, but it's going to be the same games, right? And anything new coming going forward, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Call of Duty Black Ops, Cold War, the new one, whatever new games are coming out like this year is going to be made for Xbox One and just made available for Series X. In a matter of what Microsoft calls optimized for Series X, which all of that means is taking advantage of the extra horsepower, like I just said in the PC model, to increase the frame rate to 4K, to increase the frame rate to like 120 hertz, to increase the resolution to 4K, to increase the speed of the load time with the new SSD in there, etc., etc. That kind of stuff. So it is going to work and function better. But they're still fundamentally the same games. They're not going to be brand new games doing new things that we haven't seen before, which has been the case for every console generation up until this point. So effectively, the Series X is basically nothing more than a bigger, more advanced version of what the Xbox One X was, which was just another Xbox One that had higher specs, much higher specs still, and was able to play Xbox One games at higher resolutions, higher frame rates, make everything look sharper, right? But it was still playing only Xbox One games, still look like that. Xbox now is synonymous with Windows gaming, and that's intentional. Back in 2016, Microsoft already made the decision to make sure that every first-party Xbox Game Studio game is made available for the Xbox console as well as the Windows PC. So right there, you got no console exclusives. So that issue that I just mentioned, where you can hone in on the console, has already kind of been missing for Xbox because every game is out on PC. Halo 5 came out on PC. Forza Horizon 4 came out on PC. Gears 5 came out on PC, right? Day and date with the Xbox. So, you don't need to get an Xbox console to play those games. And in fact, most likely the PC version is going to play those games better, right? So that's already been the case for years now. And now with Series X, they're just doubling down on that. Now, they said that after about a year or two, we will see some Series X console exclusives. And the Xbox Game Showcase last week, just as a little teaser, did show that. Some of the games they showed specifically just called out Series X and PC, which means that it's going to be able to target a higher spec, sure. But it's still not going to be the same as if it was just a Series X exclusive. But that said, that's still some years out. And that's kind of interesting strategy that they're doing that, right? So on one hand, Microsoft continues, like people like Aaron Greenberg at Microsoft and even Phil himself, right? They keep touting power, 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 power. Xbox Series X is the most powerful console. Power, 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 power. 4K 60, blah, 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 right? The problem with that is, first of all of that power is meaningless if the software isn't going to be designed to take advantage of it, which so far is the case. And hint, hint, we've seen that in the Xbox Game Showcase. Nothing there looked anything beyond what we have seen on the current gen Xbox One, right? And this is the reason for that, okay? So power, 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 my ass. It doesn't matter. The hardware is just plastic and numbers, man. It really is the software that really defines a generation. It's the Mario 64 that made the N64 a next generation system at the time, right? It's Halo that made the original Xbox a next generation system at the time, right? It's the software that defines that. If the software isn't going to really take advantage of that hardware, then what's the point? And that's what's happening now. So yeah, I mean, look, that's the take here. All right, I just want to make sure that it's clear that you guys understand that it comes across that what Microsoft is really doing next gen is fundamentally different than what Sony is doing with PS5 and what Sony has done in the past and what Microsoft has done in the past. In effect, Xbox Series X is not a next generation system. And people, I said that before in forums. People flipped out because they were just like, "Oh, the specs. It's 12 teraflops. It's the most powerful in paper." And that's just numbers. It's specs. And even if that were the case, okay, fine. It's the higher numbers. Again, it doesn't matter if they're not gonna have software to take advantage of it, which so far they don't, right? And when they do, it'll be years down the line, right? So, I mean, what we'll see for Series X in terms of next gen will be next gen, quote unquote, next gen games that really will be developed with the PS5 in mind, that will be able to be ported to the Series X because the specs are obviously so close, and it has an SSD and it has a Zen 2 CPU, etc., etc. So we'll see a lot of that. But from first party studios, yeah, it's going to be a lot of Xbox One games. That's going to be accelerated on your Series X as if you upgraded your PC. That's what you can expect, which is basically the same thing that we had with the Xbox One X. Now, whether that's exciting to you or not, I'm not saying that there's not going to be any cool games or anything like that, but just understand what it is and what you're getting, what Microsoft is selling. What Microsoft is selling is Game Pass. They're selling a subscription service that has access to all of these wonderful Xbox games that you can play on any Xbox device. Console, Xbox One, Xbox One S, Xbox One X, Xbox Series X. Remember, there's also going to be a lower end version of the Series X, which we are affectionately calling the Series S. So Xbox Series S, that's still to be announced, coming soon. And whatever else they do in the future, probably something more powerful than the Series Series X will also be coming in the next 2 or 3 years. And it'll be able to run and play every Xbox game that was developed before it, right? So that's cool, and what they're trying to say is they're consumer focused. They're not hardware focused. They're not even game focused. They're consumer focused. They're putting the player at the center. You should be able to play Xbox games wherever you want. And that's cool. I mean, if you like that, and it remains to be seen if that works, that's a pretty radical thing to bring to the console space. And it kind of, demeans the value of their console, the Series X. Because you can, again, play every game coming out on there on your PC already. And the fact that everything is still coming out on Xbox One means it's not really taking advantage of the hardware. So just understand what that is. And again, cool games coming, sure. You like the model, you like Xbox Live, that's where your friends are, great. But it's not a true next generation jump and transition as we have been typically used to seeing in the past. Just understand that. With that, guys, I'm going to end this one. Part 2 coming. I'm going to talk about the actual Xbox game showcase, and we'll go into that pretty soon. So thanks for listening. Please subscribe, like, comment. Let me know what you think.